Mr. Ajay Kapoor, Managing Director, Vedanta, other colleagues from the team of Swarajya, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, Swarajya is one magazine and one institution that embodies the very spirit of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And therefore, for me, it's a privilege, more than for you, Mr. Jagannathan, to be
Thank you, sir.
a part of this program today, to be among such wonderful friends and amongst journalists who uphold the highest standards of journalism, whose pen, while wielding power, also demonstrates responsibility. And therefore, it really is a delight to be a part of the Swarajya series. In fact, you come with a great lineage going right up to Sri Rajagopalachari, in a sense.
Yes.
And I think you are truly upholding their ideas, their ideals. Their voice is reflected in some of the writings that I see in Swarajya magazine. As they say, there are three needs which guide the pen of a journalist: the need of the people, the need of the nation, and the need to uphold an ideal. And to my mind, media, while of course we have to function as business organizations, but also have to work with a sense of responsibility to the nation, to the readers, and to propriety. I'm delighted that Swarajya has gone beyond commercial interests and business interests in upholding that high standard of journalism that is the need of the hour in our country today. In fact, you have spread the voice of reason far and wide today. A lot of people, I go across the country, who are talking about your magazine. And I believe that the voice of Atmanirbhar Bharat and the voice of Swarajya are quite intermingled, are quite connected. Amongst the social media, you will find a lot of skeptics. Even amongst the readers of Swarajya, you may find some skeptics. Particularly those who believe that there is no such thing like a self-reliant India. I will try in my own humble way to try and address some of these concerns and hopefully get some more buy-in into the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat. In fact, Atmanirbhar Bharat goes back to India's very roots. The sense of the Upanishads was also to talk about making India strong so that it can pave the way for liberation for oneself and for the nation. After all, when you talk of dharma, when you talk of artha, when you talk of kam, any of our old legacies, our cultural heritage, I think it always reflects also a little bit of focus on Atmanirbhar individual, Atmanirbhar society, and Atmanirbhar nation. Actually, the onus for Atmanirbhar Bharat is on all of us collectively. Each one of us will play our role in one way or the other. And when you look at the true meaning of Atmanirbhar Bharat, while it is not about closing India's doors to international engagement or global engagement, it's not about becoming exclusive and only living within your own country and your own self. It's actually more about opening the doors wider so that India engages with the rest of the world from a position of strength, India engages with the rest of the world on equal, fair, and reciprocal terms. We are not looking at creating a India which is backward looking. We are not creating an India which is shutting its doors to modern technology, to the new age way of living and working. We are actually looking at how India can truly reflect our strengths when we are engaging in global trade, in global diplomatic outreach. India can truly reflect our strengths of democracy, our strengths of demography, our strengths of huge demand, a big consumer base, 1 billion plus people, 1.3 billion people aspiring for a better quality of life. And therefore, when we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the effort is that India should focus its energies to create what we can within the country, learn from experiences from across the world, bring the best of technologies to India, attract capital, attract skills, attract high quality education, healthcare, so that we can serve our people better, but at the same time, prepare the nation to be stronger, to be able to withstand shocks. And no better example than the COVID-19 pandemic and the way India faced this pandemic to demonstrate India's ability to be Atmanirbhar. I would like to go to the roots of this program, which start, of course, in some sense, right from the days of independence, from the days of Mahatma Gandhi and Sardar Patel, talking about a strong India, talking about a self-reliant India, talking about Swadeshi. But even when we look at the Janasangh, our original avatar, the party that from which we all came into the Bharatiya Janata Party, Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay had said, and I quote, "It is essential that we think about our national identity, without which there is no meaning of independence." And in national identity, while national pride is one aspect, there is also national ability to meet the needs of the people of India. When the COVID pandemic broke out, January, February of 2020, 10, 11 months ago, I am sure many of you will recall where India stood in terms of our preparedness to face this pandemic. We had one testing laboratory in Pune, which could do 250 tests. By the time we went into lockdown, we had only 4 testing centers with an ability to do about 2,500 tests every day. The country did not make personal protective equipment. We imported them and had a few thousand in stock only. They wouldn't have lasted us 5 days or a week if the rate of COVID patients had increased in the exponential way that scientists and doctors were projecting. We could have had a serious crisis of ICU beds and adequate medical facilities. Our doctors and nurses were not trained in COVID protocols. For that matter, the COVID protocols themselves are not well defined. We were grappling with the unknown. Ventilators could have become a crisis. We had not yet realized the importance of masks until then. Yet, and I know this from personal experience, Prime Minister Modi was always 2 steps ahead of the curve while preparing and studying and learning about COVID-19 and how earlier pandemics have affected the world. I still recall the day he called me up much before the lockdown, Mr. Jagannath.
Yes.
Probably
Yeah.
end of February or thereabouts, when I
Right.
received a call from him early morning suggesting, why can't we make COVID isolation wards in your railway trains? It came as quite a bit of a surprise. For the life of me or any of my government or railway officials, we had never imagined that a railway compartment could become a COVID isolation ward. We said we'll certainly look at it, but it did come as quite an out of the box thought that didn't seem at all realistic at that point of time. You know that ultimately we went on to become COVID ready with 80,000 beds in 5,000 coaches in the Indian Railways at a very low cost, very nominal cost. But look at the insurance value of these 80,000 beds. And what was the Prime Minister's vision? Should COVID spread wildly across the country, it will be nearly impossible to move COVID patients to the cities where there would be doctors and hospitals. In such a situation, with railway stations in the length and breadth of the country, nearly 7,000-8,000 of them, it's easier to move a compartment to the nearest railway station to wherever there would be a COVID outbreak and provide the facilities and COVID care at the place where the outbreak is. Look at the vision of the man. Much before the world could even recognize the seriousness of COVID. At that stage, we didn't even have 500 patients of COVID. Not even 500. But he recognized we need time to educate our people. We need time to understand COVID. At that point of time, it was quite clear that it was being transmitted by human touch, surfaces, close contact, and therefore the need of the hour was test, trace, and then isolate. But for that, we needed to ramp up testing facilities. We needed to ramp up availability of personal protective equipment. Imagine a situation if COVID would have grown exponentially and we didn't have PPE kits. Nobody would have been there to even treat a COVID patient. How would any doctor or nurse go near a COVID patient? There were some very ugly scenes in some places in Europe where people were actually removing bodies from their home onto the streets, but not even giving a decent burial to people who were affected or who lost their life due to COVID because they were scared to even touch the body. But in India, thanks to the very, very clear thinking that Prime Minister Modi had, that we will need some time to prepare the nation for COVID. We'll need to start becoming self-reliant in testing kits, testing facilities, personal protective equipment, masks, medical facilities, ICUs, ventilators, COVID care wards, the specialized training of our doctors, nurses, technicians, all of which require time to make India self-sufficient. And therefore, I think the Janta curfew first demonstrated India's confidence in Prime Minister Modi, leading him to take the bold decision to lock down the nation, buy some time to be able to become self-sufficient, Atmanirbhar, to fight COVID pandemic, and then rapidly start unlocking the nation. Yesterday's figures clearly demonstrate that India and Indian economy, we did suffer a serious setback in the first quarter, which was only expected given the strict nature of lockdown that was implemented in India. Mind you, without which India would not have been safe today. It's only thanks to that lockdown and the strict implementation of that lockdown widely recognized the world over as a role model, the best lockdown anywhere in the world. The WHO has recognized it as the best lockdown, most essential for a country like India at that point of time. But the rapid V-shaped recovery shown in yesterday's figure in the Q2 shows that Prime Minister Modi and the various initiatives that he has taken over the last 8 or 9 months since March, from the period of lockdown, from the inspirational guidance that he gave all of us, from the way he led from the front, from the way he researched every aspect of COVID, of pandemics. Today he is visiting 3 places where the vaccine is being developed to get a first-hand knowledge and understanding and start preparing the logistics and the future rollout of the vaccine. Truly, we are blessed to have a leader like Prime Minister Modi today, somebody who has shown the way for the country to not only fight the COVID pandemic, but demonstrated the confidence that India will emerge stronger and better post-COVID. The Atmanirbhar Bharat package that he announced, aggregating nearly 20 lakh crores in the first instance, with all the 3 packages put together going close to 30 lakh crores, have shown the light of the tunnel, in the tunnel of progress, have shown that as we emerge out of the darkness of COVID pandemic, we are going to fly, we are going to really take the Indian economy, the Indian growth story to greater and greater heights. And in that, the Atmanirbhar Bharat program is a very, very key element in the plans before the country for the future. In fact, there are so many products that we have been assessing that we import from other parts of the world. Low quality products, unnecessary imports, which we can easily make in India. There are so many products which we are exporting to other parts of the world. Yet our share of global trade, 2%, 3% or thereabouts, in products where we have competitive or comparative advantage, as Michael Porter would call it. But we haven't been able to scale up to become dominant world players in international markets. That is what Prime Minister Modi intends to prepare India to become. A global player, a global partner in resilient supply chains, a trusted friend, a trusted partner when like-minded countries are looking to expand trade or looking for alternate sources for manufacture of their goods or provision of their services. India is going to provide that destination for investment, for manufacturing, and for services that the world has been looking for. And ladies and gentlemen, we have been working on several initiatives, one of which was recently unveiled in terms of the production-linked incentive, where earlier 3 sectors, mobile phones, pharmaceutical, drugs in terms of API and KSM, and medical devices were offered production-linked incentives. Now 10 more sectors are being covered in a program which will cost nearly 2 lakh crore rupees over the next 5 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this 2 lakh crore rupees has the ability to create an ecosystem which will expand India's domestic manufacturing by not less than 20 lakh crores every year. And for those of you who take interest in economics, when you are adding 20 lakh crores manufacturing ecosystem in India, even if you take a conservative 30% as labor or salary wages or the component of labor, direct and indirect. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at 6 lakh crore rupees going into the hands of the people of India. You are looking at over 3 crore people getting well-paying, good working opportunities, formal and informal. You're looking at entrepreneurs getting incentivized in the support ecosystem that these sectors will require. Apart from this, we are identifying more and more sectors which may not need PLI, but which may need deregulation, which may need some handholding, which may need some other form of support or incentive, which may need the government to unshackle maybe some laws. We are identifying each of these sectors. We are working in close partnership with the industry, private sector. It's a three-way: industry associations, government and the private sector, working in partnership to define and determine areas where India has the comparative advantage, where India has the capability to serve the world, to make for the world, and collectively we are working out what we will do to make India truly a self-reliant, proud nation, serving the world, serving the people of India. And in some sense, all we are doing is implementing what Mahatma Gandhi told us, what Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel told us, the guidance that Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay gave us. As they say, national destiny cannot exist without a national identity. And Atmanirbhar Bharat today is giving us that national identity that all of us Indians have been yearning for a long, long time. If I may be allowed to quote Sardar Patel, and I quote, my only desire is that India should be a good producer and no one should be hungry, shedding tears for food in the country. Our farmers have done us proud. They have made us self-sufficient in food grain, in most of our requirements for foodstuffs. We are now looking at strengthening the hands of the farmers, unshackling them from the constraints of the past, from the constraints of an ecosystem that was devised when we were a country of food shortages. We are preparing the country and our farmers to become stronger, to get the ability to market their own product anywhere in the country, just like you can market any other product. A pen manufacturer doesn't have restrictions on where and to whom he can market. A thermos manufacturer has no restriction on what he can manufacture, where he can market, to whom he can sell. I think our farmers also deserve the same independence while continuing to support our farmers to expand their production, to increase their incomes, which this government is committed to do. It's of course a little unfortunate that some political vested interests are misguiding our farmers, but I am very confident that just like almost across the country, farmers have welcomed our new initiatives on the farm side. The few misguided farmers will also understand the well-meaning intentions behind these changes for the benefit of the farmers, for a better future for our farmers. Similarly, in manufacturing and in production, we are looking at high quality production at high productivity levels. We are planning next month to have a focused intervention across the country, sectorally, to encourage quality and productivity. These will be the hallmarks of India's future manufacturing industry. And I have the confidence that Prime Minister Modi's leadership and Prime Minister Modi's vision will help us in preparing India, inculcating in every Indian that spirit, that nationalist spirit of supporting India and Indian production, as well as making India a well-respected manufacturer of goods and provider of services. In fact, I found a lot of people during this Diwali saying that we bought only made in India products. We didn't buy anything that came from abroad. I find a lot of people who say we've stopped buying those products which are equally available made in India just to save a rupee or two or a small percentage. We are not looking at importing goods. We'd rather pay in the short run a little bit more, but develop the Indian industry and provide our brothers and sisters an opportunity to lead a better quality of life through greater manufacturing and greater jobs in India. I am sure Atmanirbhar Bharat will be a reality, but it cannot be a reality without the active participation of all of you. ये जन भागीदारी से ही संभव है. And I invite all of you to be a part of this journey towards a self-reliant India, towards a strong India, towards an India recognized the world over as an economic powerhouse. The dream of Atmanirbhar Bharat can only become a reality when each one of us adopts Prime Minister Modi's clarion call for being vocal for local. If we move with determination, if we move with enthusiasm and speed, I have no doubt in my mind that we will certainly be successful in our goal for an Atmanirbhar Bharat. In conclusion, if I may quote from the words of the late Sri Rajagopalachari, the original founder of Swarajya,
yes,
in the 50s, and I quote, "It is easy to yield to the current pressure of opinion, and it is difficult to impose on enthusiastic people any policy of restraint. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I appeal to you, don't yield to any effort being made to deride or belittle this huge effort to take this country to greater heights that this Prime Minister Modi has embarked upon. You should become the opinion makers who propagate the message of Atmanirbhar Bharat through the length and breadth of this country and bring that enthusiasm in every single Indian to be a part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat story." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Goyalji. I would just like to pose a few questions on behalf of various people who have been listening to this. There was a brilliant exposition, and you actually anticipated some of the questions I might have asked. I think some of the things, if you notice the last GDP figures, in terms of current GDP, we have lost about 13 lakh crores in the lockdown and slowdown phase of the economy. But you have told us that once the various PLI schemes are out of work, they're going to add 20 lakh crores annually. So this small drop in GDP is going to be wiped out in double quick time as soon as these schemes are rolled out. So just to come to the first thing, how will you measure the success of our Atmanirbhar Bharat schemes? Will it be in terms of jobs, manufacturing share in GDP, exports? How will you judge the success of these schemes?
Mr. Jagannathan, it will be an interplay which will be evident in a variety of metrics. While obviously the share of manufacturing in the GDP should go up, and we are very keen that it goes up, there'll be several aspects to the effort to become self-reliant. Let me share an example with you. Value addition. The Honorable Prime Minister from the Red Fort on 15th August spoke about greater value addition in India of the products that we manufacture here. So whether we are going to export a raw material or we are going to export an intermediate or a finished product will determine the level of development or the stage of development of the country, which will of course also encourage better designing, better packaging. With value add comes technology, and all of these obviously lead to greater jobs, both direct and indirect. So for example, mobiles, from a position where we had 2 or 3 plants manufacturing mobiles, we believe there are 100 plants. Now obviously, this has added lakhs and lakhs of jobs for our youngsters. Secondly, the import of a finished mobile phone versus the import of a few critical components that are today coming in, which also we will hopefully develop in the next 3-4 years so that we become completely self-reliant in manufacture of mobiles. But rather than importing a $200 mobile, if we import $20 of components but add the rest of the value in India, look at the huge ecosystem, jobs, manufacturing GDP that you will create in India. So I think you'll have to keep looking at several metrics: GDP growth, tax collection, job growth, formal and informal, the services sector growth. With manufacturing, there's a natural growth of services. As I said, design, packaging, transport, logistics, all of these also add to manufacturing strength. And to provide all this, again you need to manufacture. So you manufacture railway coaches, trucks, commercial vehicles to provide the service. So manufacturing and service go hand in hand. And I think you'll see all-round development in the coming years.
So, 2 related questions. I think you famously pulled us under Mr. Modi's directions out of an unfair deal in RCEP. One thing is there, this was obviously not good for us, joining us at this stage when we are not fully Atmanirbhar. Second thing is, even in our other FTAs, we have not been particularly successful. And we have seen a flood of cheap imports coming from multiple directions. Do you see some changes in both the approaches to the new FTAs apart from RCEP itself?
Well, I believe per se FTAs are not bad. FTAs are good for the nation, and we must look to leverage FTAs with countries with whom you have transparent trading mechanisms, who are working with transparent business systems, with whom you can engage from a position of strength for certain products where you are looking at market access in those countries. Unfortunately, the experience with our old FTAs, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, APTA, with all of this, is that we did not correspondingly prepare Indian capabilities. And therefore, while other countries benefited from market access in India, we could not benefit from corresponding market access in those countries. Our effort today is to expand our manufacturing abilities and bring about more reciprocity in trade with other countries. One of the primary reasons we could not join RCEP was that some of the countries in the RCEP were really not democratic, transparent trading systems. And when you are dealing with an unfair partner, a partner which does not really give a level playing field or reciprocal access, or where there is risk of predatory pricing, where there is risk of circumvention of country of origin rules, one does have to be cautious. I think India should focus its energies on FTAs initially with developed countries who are looking for market access in the large Indian market, but who can also provide us high technology products while opening the doors in their countries for products where India has strength. It could be food processing products, marine products, it could be iron and steel, aluminium, it could be textiles, footwear, it could be our handicrafts and cottage industry products. There are several areas where India has very, very good strengths. I think with countries with whom we have reciprocal and equitable relationship is where we will focus our energies for future FTAs.
Right. Are we going to use standards to keep out, say, cheap and substandard imports, which is what most of the advanced countries do? I mean, we don't. Are we doing any such thing?
You're absolutely spot on, Mr. Jagannathan. This was one of my first learnings when I became Commerce Minister. When we were doing a comparative analysis, we realized India in most cases does not have internationally benchmarked quality standards. Of course, one of the reasons also is that the same standards apply in India and would apply to the imports that come to India. But because we never strengthened our manufacturing base, because we never focused on giving our consumers high quality products, we remained content on being a little bit of a, if I may use the Hindi word, chalta hai manufacturing economy or a jugaad manufacturing economy. I think we landed up in a situation where domestically also there was a lot of resistance to high quality standards. When we embarked on creating standards for more and more products, and I think you must be seeing that right now, this government is introducing standards on almost all the items of importance to our consumers. We initially faced a lot of resistance even from Indian industry.
That's
We were so used to the low quality products. But I'm happy to say that continuous engagement and education and dialogue between industry and government has paid rich dividends. Industry has recognized that these standards are good for India, good for all Indians, and we are introducing more and more standards and are that India as a manufacturing nation will soon start adopting world-class standards, and therefore our products will find greater acceptability in the rest of the world, as well as will serve the people of India with better quality, more sustainable products and safer products.
Right. One of the 2 points is while our infrastructure is steadily improving and gradually becoming world-class in many areas, some of our other costs, like say power, interstate movement curbs, contact enforcement when there are business deals, as you know, in the doing business rankings, in these areas, some of these areas, we are pretty bad, especially contract enforcement. Then reduction of regulatory friction. These are all the other things that make you competitive. Are we seeing something holistic movement on these areas, which are more structural in nature and not directly related to a product cost?
Mr. Jagannathan, we have received very, very strong directions from the Honorable Prime Minister to work on making it easier to do business in India. Therefore, preparing a framework for enforcement of contracts is a very critical aspect of our work. All business, whether Indian or international, wants certainty, wants predictability, wants a stable regulatory framework. At the same time, they want faster justice. IBC, for example, is one effort in that direction, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Similarly, we have now started the process of starting commercial courts so that commercial disputes can be settled in a faster manner. The International Arbitration Center in New Delhi is taking off. So we are very focused on efforts to make it easier to do business, the various parameters of that, deregulating, decriminalizing the laws so people work with peace of mind, ensuring that it's easier to comply with the various laws. In labor, you saw 40 or 36 laws being codified into 4 labor laws. Currently, Industry Ministry is working on a genuine single window. I know many of you will find that very unbelievable. I myself have heard this word for the last 30 years. But every time we saw a single window, glanced inside the single window, we saw 30 doors behind the window. This time around, I'm personally steering an effort to make sure that we create a genuine single window. And I don't mind taking a minute to explain what my concept is. What I'm trying to do is something that many of you may have gone through when you or your children applied for admission in a foreign university. When you apply to the US, in any university in the US, there's a common application form where you put in your normal common data. And then there are annexures, addendums, where each college asks you to write an essay or provide some additional information. My direction to the officers is that use that as the framework. Create a common database that nobody minds sharing. Your name, your address, your director's identification number, your Aadhaar number, your phone number, all the typical data, which is in any case in public domain. And every license, every approval, every return that is required to be filed, which also needs this common data, should be addendums to this. So people are not all the time filling up wasteful forms and wasteful paperwork. All of it online. All of it with very clear directions and support in filling up with pop-down menus and stuff like that. One single payment gateway. So we are making an effort. We are working closely with all the chambers of commerce, industry associations. I pray and wish this time we are successful in a genuine single window.
That's great. In fact, one of the refreshing changes we have seen under this Modi 2 is that you have used a crisis and turned it into an opportunity by doing such far-reaching changes in agriculture, in manufacturing, and possibly in services too. So one of the questions we are getting from one of our audiences is, you see, over and above the ecosystem changes that you're planning, will there be specific kinds of incentives to boost, say, exports? You have PLI for Make in India and Make for India and for export. But is there going to be a specific scheme of export incentives coming or to boost certain kinds of exports?
You know, you really can't give any specific incentives to exports given the WTO framework in which we are all doing business today. And end of the day, if we start doing that, there'll be retaliatory action from other countries. But PLI, in a way, the idea is that when you manufacture to such large volumes, and we are encouraging large-scale manufacturing, obviously you will serve Indian market, but you'll have large surpluses to serve international markets. So direct, indirectly, you are supporting the export market. So it's a very well thought out scheme. Other than that, we are trying to bring down logistics costs. We are trying to work on making it easier in terms of paperwork and port logistics or airport logistics for the exporters or for the foreign trade. We will continue to work with banks to provide low cost finance to our exporters. So we'll really have to try and provide them a level playing field compared to other parts of the world, but may not be in a position to actually give export incentives per se to promote exports. And I, for one, believe that subsidies are like clutches. Then you get used to them and you can never get out of them. We have to strengthen the muscles, the muscle power of India and Indian industry. That's what we are trying to do.
Absolutely. Coming more specifically to your other portfolio, that is railways, what kind of role will this particular sector play in Atmanirbhar Bharat? Is there anything specific? Of course, you told us about what you did during COVID, but is there something more to it than that?
I would appeal to you to publicize through your publication that we are looking for more and more Indian suppliers for everything that the railway needs. You'll be happy to know that today, railways only procures under 2% of the current procurement from outside the country. And we already have a plan to replace that 2% also from Indian products. But we are looking at new technology coming into India. We want high-speed trains coming into India. We want better signaling systems. We want better rolling stock. We want better track. So Indian Railways is now looking at the next level of development, which will obviously mean going world-class. So for example, we'll be completely electrified. First railway in the world of our size to be 100% electrified by December 2023, saving India thousands of crores of foreign exchange used for import of diesel, which we were using earlier. And of course, saving us costs also. Simultaneously, we plan to invest in 20 gigawatt of renewable energy so that by 2030, we will be the world's first net zero railway for truly sustainable transport and logistics. It will be the world's first railway of this size with zero carbon emission. All of that we want to be made in India. Atmanirbhar India should make all those solar panels. As we set up the Shinkansen technology from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, high-speed rail, I hope more and more people will look at coming and manufacturing in India for future high-speed railways. Even in this, our import content is now down to under 20% or 22%. The rest of it is all Indian. So our effort is more and more bring modern technology. Initially, we may even have to import, but gradually become self-sufficient.
One last question, in fact, to this thing. One of our audience is asking, now most of the new services are dominated by global technology giants, the Google, Facebook, whatever it is. Does the government have an Atmanirbharta plan for creating India's first giant technology platform or this thing like that? Or is it something that will have to come from within, from something? We have seen one major player rise. But is there some plan to even make technology one of the huge sources of Atmanirbharta?
Certainly, technology will play an important role, Mr. Jagannathan. But you will appreciate that government will not be able to do this. Government can act as an enabler. So we would like to support if any Indian company goes in to develop 5G technology, for example. We would like to support if some of you startup entrepreneurs develop new technologies and scale it up in India. For example, today in education, we are seeing our startups are becoming world-class. I believe that the private sector is best suitable for this kind of technology engagement and expansion. We in government will be happy to support in whatever way you want. And we would urge our startup entrepreneurs to write in to me or my office if we can support you in any way, if you feel that there are any policy hindrances or any other things that government can do to support our Indian startup and technology ecosystem.
My last question is slightly political. I think if we really want to be Atmanirbhar, our states, which may be ruled sometimes by your party, sometimes by other parties, need to be fully engaged with the idea of making the ecosystem smooth and friction-free. But if they're busy stopping your reforms, like you're seeing in agriculture in Punjab these days, and if you say, I create a single window and they build 20 doors, then how are we going to make sure that this works? So I would like a political economic. How are these guys going to be brought into the network of making a friction-free Bharat, which will enable all businesses?
Mr. Jagannathan, my own sense is by and large, irrespective of which party, political parties and government in different states, the people drive how the state will also respond. There'll be an occasional instance, like we are seeing in Punjab, where the political leadership or the government of the day itself may misguide a certain section of society. But I think over a period of time, people will realize that after all, in a country of 28 states and 8 union territories, if 27 states and 8 union territories are all happy to adopt these new laws and there's no agitation anywhere in the country, then certainly something is wrong in our thinking when we are agitated. Similarly, when we are talking of promoting manufacturing, ultimately everybody wants jobs for their people. Everybody wants economic activity, which gives the state revenue. So I think the people will drive, irrespective of political affiliation, the people will drive change, will drive growth, will drive the Atmanirbhar Bharat program. We may have an aberration or two, but in a large country like India, I think we can certainly overcome an occasional aberration. But time is the best healer. I'm sure in time, and hopefully in a short period of time, people will realize that the intention and mindset is for the welfare of 1.3 billion Indians, is for the good of India, is for the good of this nation, and for the good of every section of society, that this government is working on various ideas, various plans.